Hi, everybody. We're right about 2 p.m., right? When usually, like after lunch, we start getting a little bit sleepy. So I'll try to keep the energy level as high as possible. So first of all, let's give another round of applause to Eric. Wasn't it an awesome presentation? And being in San Diego, we're just so lucky to have Eric and his team and people like Eric in the city administration, because it's just so much fun to work with them. They get innovation, they get newest technologies, they get what the vision, what the city should be like. It's just, I can't put it any different way than saying we're lucky in San Diego. So actually, even though on the introduction it said like the CEO of the Silent Intelligence, I'm going to be speaking here today not as the CEO of the Silent Intelligence, but as a co-founder and managing partner of Scale San Diego, Smart Cities, Accelerator, Labs, and Environment. And to begin, I want you guys to imagine that you guys have an old house that you like very, very much. And in the basement of the house, there's a lot of stuff that accumulated, and there's another problem that the water keeps seeping in. And it's kind of annoying. It's not a big problem yet, and you just turn on the pump and pump the water out of the basement, but it keeps coming in. So you keep doing it, and strangely enough, the more you're trying to clean up in your basement, the more water keeps coming in. And at some point of time, it's becoming a bigger and bigger problem. So the pump is not enough. So you start using all the buckets that you have in the house to get the water out of the basement. And as you're doing this, all of a sudden the water starts coming in through all the walls. And then no buckets are enough. And at this point of time, you just want to abandon everything and run, except you can't. Because it's actually your city. And the water is the data that's coming at you. And it's coming at you really, really fast. And you don't have enough pumps or buckets to handle with it. So, as we briefly touched yesterday, cities are drowning in data. Based on different estimates, right now we're at about maybe close to 16% CAGR of data growth, annual data growth. And in about 5 or so years, we're supposed to reach 36% CAGR, which is doubling every 2 years. The amount of data coming at us is going to double every 2 years. And what kind of data are we talking about in cities? We talk about the data that we had all the time, like schedules, the things that are being digitized. Schedules, permits, blueprints, and so on and so on. And on top of all of that, the new big data is coming in. The data from sensors, image sensors, temperature sensors, environmental sensors, all types of sensors, mapping data, GIS data, and it keeps coming. And as was mentioned by McKinsey, governments have more data than they have manpower to handle. While all this is happening, the key urban challenges that we have are getting worse, right? The traffic is getting worse. Homelessness is becoming a worse problem than it's ever been. Housing, affordable housing, becoming a big problem. The amount of time people spend looking for parking in the cities is increasing. The frequency of extreme weather events like heat waves, droughts, floods, hurricanes is increasing. And the amount of trash is piling up, keeps growing in the cities. And these are mostly analog problems. And we call them analog problems because they don't have a straightforward, obvious technology solution. You have to figure out how to address these problems with technology. So that puts us in a situation that we call the gap between technology and reality. We have analog problems, which are homelessness, parking shortage, car traffic, severe climate events, and so on. And we have digital solutions provided by the corporations, such as networks and big data, and sensor platforms, and artificial intelligence and machine learning. And we haven't quite figured out yet how to bridge these two worlds, because you really need to think outside the box. And a lot of things that we call smart city solutions are maybe not quite smart city solutions yet. Because what we've done, we've connected a meter to the cloud. Great. We haven't quite solved the traffic problem or the parking problem. We just solved one little step. And very few people on either side of this divide, of this gap, understand the other side's problems. Because most technology companies are looking to sell a machine learning platform or a sensor platform to the city, and they don't really understand what problem their technology is supposed to solve. And that's why companies are getting so frustrated that smart city opportunities are not taking up fast enough. They're not happening fast enough. The adoption is not happening fast enough. Maybe, just maybe, because we're not solving the right problems. Maybe we need to spend time understanding those problems. So how do you address those things? I mean, there are different ways to fund smart city projects. Of course, one way is the city budgets. But where do the city budgets come from? Taxes. Any of us want to pay more taxes? Anybody? I didn't think so. Well, okay, then maybe you can issue bonds. Also not a very sustainable way to fund projects. Okay, there's some grants and some federal funding for smart city projects. Again, it's a great way to kickstart projects, but not a very sustainable way to fund smart city projects. A better way to look at smart city projects are the public-private partnerships. And we've seen a lot of examples. I mean, a great example is, how many of you are familiar with the DOT challenge that the city of Columbus, Ohio won a few years ago? So that was, if I'm not mistaken, about a $50 million grant from Department of Transportation that the city of Columbus, Ohio won. But once they've secured that, there's over $100 million came in private funding from companies. They wanted to participate in this ecosystem. So that was a great example how, kickstarting it with a grant from the government, you can bring a lot of private investment to drive transportation solutions in the city. We touched briefly on that yesterday, great ways to fund infrastructure projects. So today in the cities, we have 5G infrastructure deployment, we have fiber cable deployment, and these companies are investing billions of dollars in city infrastructure. But in a lot of cases, they want to get there faster than anybody else. And when they come to the city and says, how can we roll it out faster? And the cities usually respond with, how can you solve our problems? And the companies go like, we have some smart city solutions. What kind of smart city solutions? We have smart kiosks. But we don't care about smart city kiosks. What else do you have? And that's finally when the discussions start getting to the point of, okay, now you finally start thinking about what smart city solutions you can bring on top of your infrastructure. Then it would explain why you need the high-speed fiber optical infrastructure in the city. Because you can provide educational solution for underserved neighborhoods, for example. Or because you can provide some other type of transportation solutions, or ways to monitor and analyze video data at the edge that are going to optimize the traffic or going to be beneficial for climate action plan goals. So infrastructure projects is probably what in the next few years, probably next 2, 3, 5 years, are going to dominate smart city opportunities, because there's really significant investments coming into the cities from those companies. We're talking about billions of dollars in aggregate. But there are other ways to look at public-private partnerships. There are ways to look at, like, how do the cities, instead of funding the infrastructure, how they can pay for just the services they use. If somebody goes and rolls out the infrastructure, whether it's cameras or any other sensors, and the cities are only paying for the data that they need instead of paying for the infrastructure. And the companies deploying this infrastructure have also ways to use the data and monetize the data. Then there's a concession-based approach where cities actually participate in, so actually companies participate in cost savings, where they provide certain, whether it's parking solutions or transportation solutions, they can save money to the city, and they can participate in that. And probably some of the most interesting opportunities going forward is revenue share and equity-based. So that's where we're just starting to scratch the surface, because cities have a lot of data, and cities have a lot of publicly available data. And publicly available data is free. But the value-added services built on top of publicly available data don't have to be free. If those services are provided to, for example, real estate community, that's going to help them better estimate the value of the lots they're about to purchase, or estimate the future value of their investment, this is worth money to them. So there's a way for the city and some of those companies providing the services to share revenue on services like that. And there's also an opportunity for cities to invest in some companies that are developing their solutions in the cities, with the thinking that these companies can scale across other cities. They've tested this technology in this particular city. They've figured out the product market fit, which is one of the biggest problems a lot of startup companies have. And once they figure it out, now they can go to the other city. And the city where they started can vouch for them. Great opportunity going forward. We need to start embracing them. We need to start looking at them. Eric mentioned about US Ignite program. How many of you are familiar with US Ignite Smart Gigabit Communities program? Very few. I think the city of Albuquerque is one of the cities. There's overall over 20 communities, or 25. Is it 25? 25. Over 25 communities in the United States that are participating. So this is actually a great example when we talked about the infrastructure projects, right? So US Ignite is a nonprofit, federal nonprofit, that focuses on creation of next generation applications, right? And it's funded by multiple corporations. A lot of these corporations, like Cox, for example, are looking into rolling out their infrastructure in the cities or upgrading their infrastructure in the cities. So they have a direct interest in determining what type of smart city solutions are going to run on their infrastructure, on their networks. And this is a great way of thinking about a public-private partnership where they bring together the corporations, they bring together the city, they bring local nonprofits to generate new solutions that would run on their network. And actually, in our recent discussions with them, they're going beyond. They're saying it doesn't necessarily have to utilize the fiber optical networks. Just think broader, think wider, think about what kind of transformational solutions you can run in the city. More important thing is they're solving particular problems in the city. So as we were thinking about how do you drive innovation in the city by using public-private partnerships, we're thinking about a program that will allow to bring together multiple parties. Private corporations, city governments, local nonprofits, very importantly, academia, and local talent communities. And you start by bringing these partners, corporations, and the cities. Well, city can help you understand what problems they're trying to solve. Sometimes, in all fairness, cities don't always know what problems they have. So you need to spend some time understanding the environment, understanding the way the processes are run, and spend extra effort in defining the problems. They can also give you access to data. The corporations can give access to technology platforms and also to data. And then you bring together the teams that can start thinking through those problems, using those data and using those technologies and coming up with ideas. But you have to run it as a program. And just one reverse pitch competition is not enough. And one of the things that I probably learned on running Smart City Hackathons is there are some things hackathons are great for, and there are some things that hackathons are absolutely horrible for. Hackathons are great for bringing community together. Hackathons are great in figuring out teams and showing who is great at working under pressure and producing results under pressure. Hackathons are great for generating ideas. Hackathons are horrible at developing solutions. or developing something they can take and implement. A lot of companies like Facebook or Walmart have been using hackathon for generating product ideas or solving problems, but not developing actual products. So hackathon is a great place to start, but it's not the end of it. You got to start at the hackathon, but then you have to build a program that takes the ideas and the teams that came out of the hackathon and develops them into something that you can trial, test, proof of concept, and implement. And then you can select the winners, and then you can figure out what's happening next. Very few people do that, unfortunately, in different programs. Either you need to line up some funding and spin them out as a startup and allow them to grow by themselves, or you need to think through how to implement it with the city. And I think what's the city of San Diego is doing with the Startup and Residence program, kind of rethinking the procurement. And this is a huge step in the right direction, because procurement traditionally with cities has been the bottleneck on how do you bring the innovation, right? So what I just described to you is what prompted us creating Scale San Diego. It was created just over a year ago in January 2017 by entrepreneurs, tech investors, and real estate developers. And our mission, as we see it, is bridging the gap between technology and reality in cities. And this is kind of to quickly summarize the approach that we take. First and foremost, we develop an intimate understanding of urban challenges. Then it's very important to understand priorities of each city, because challenges are similar, priorities are different. If you try to sell or try to offer a public safety solution in San Diego, it maybe won't get as much attention as in Chicago. Based on geographic realities, based on political realities, and based on a lot of other aspects, it's critical to understand what the particular city and actually particular region will appreciate versus maybe not. The next step is to formulate the problems in the way that can be addressed by AI or machine learning. So you can break down problems into the parts that can be addressed by machine algorithms. And finally, it's very important to engage local teams, universities, talent groups, nonprofits, to work in help developing those solutions on existing technology platforms. So, wrapping things up, the opportunities for corporations in smart cities, it's very important to engage local communities. It's going to help you do this extra mile of customization and do this extra mile of bringing your solution closer to the city realities of a particular city. It's very critical to invest in the effort to understand the complexity of urban challenges, so ultimately the problems that your technology is supposed to solve. Remember the old maxim about thinking globally and acting locally? So with cities, it's important to think global but act regional. It's not only a particular city, it's the whole region, which has a particular set of challenges. It's important to know those challenges. Engage ecosystems. It's not just about your company. What are the other companies that you can partner with that you can provide a more holistic and more of an end-to-end solution to a city problem? And very importantly, demonstrate that you care about this particular city, this particular community, and these problems. Thank you very much. I think we have a minute or two for questions.
Yes.
Well, first of all, I want to say that it's a breath of fresh air, your presentation, and I think you nailed a couple of really important, very insightful things, like that divide between solution providers and technology companies and cities, digital solutions and analog problems. That was a great slide. Particularly on scale, what is your business model? How, if you work with a city, is it a contractual thing where a city would hire you to come in and do this? Or, like, I guess I'm putting you on the spot, but you didn't touch on that, and I'm curious to know how would a city engage with Scale if, say, this sounded really good, and we wanted to try something like that in our community.
Well, whether it's a good idea or not, I'll let Eric speak to that. But just without going into too much detail, we believe, so our business model is primarily working with the corporations. Yes, we do work with the city, but we're ultimately thinking that the biggest opportunity is building the ecosystem and bringing the corporations together. And there's so much value for corporations in some of the things we listed, right? So like understanding the problem, understanding the regional benefits, and we can help corporations understand and grasp all those things.
So as a follow-up question, do you find corporations then are willing to work in this and like without being paid necessarily by the cities?
No, ultimately, at the end of the day, they need to pay if they want to participate. They're paying for value, right? So we're not like, they're paying for specific value that we provide.
I see, the corporations are sponsoring you. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it sponsorship because it's defined by very milestones and deliverables and so on. Yeah.
The questions for Daniel. Yes.
Maybe you could expand a little bit on the public-private partnerships. You gave some examples of value that can be brought to the table. But what does the deal look like? What does a public-private partnership deal look like?
So there could be different types of deals as we described, right, depending on what it is. So in some cases, let's just take one example. So a company comes in and says, hey, we're actually going to deploy cameras or deploy sensors across the city. But cities, instead of paying for the deployment of those cameras, we're actually going to pay for the deployment. However, we both have a right to use the data, and we're going to provide the data back to the city. City is going to pay back for the service that we actually provide, and we have a right to monetize the data. That's just like one of the most straightforward ways. There are many different ways. So like when we were going through different models, right? So what infrastructure investment is one way. Based on concessions is another way. Based on like revenue sharing model is another way. Based per service is another way. So there are different models you can do with it. At the end of the day, like what problem are we solving? What are the benefits? Actually, let me make like one more statement, right? So very often what you see happening today is corporations, big cloud corporation, not naming specific names, go to the city and say, hey, can you please share certain data with us, and we're going to give you back data. We're going to pay you back in the data. This is not a fair deal by any means, because that cloud corporation has 1,000 data scientists who can make use of this data and create something. The city does not. So even if the city gets back a lot of data, they don't necessarily have the capabilities to process this and do something with it, right? So there's got to be a different thinking about those partnerships. It's not always a fair deal. So you always need to think about what value am I getting as a city. But by the way, do you represent a corporation or a city?
No, I'm sorry, I represent the state of New York.
Perfect.
I'm just familiar with public-private partnerships from past work, mostly in infrastructure and construction areas. So those kind of things are straightforward. It's just another financing method.
Well, because data is becoming a bigger issue in these type of projects. You always need to think through who is benefiting how much with this data, and can be a little bit skewed towards one party or the other. So that thinking process is very critical.
Hi, Dan. One last question. What happens when the revenue share model doesn't work because the projections that they made didn't happen? So I think New York Link was one of them where they made certain projections and then didn't come to realization. So what happens in those cases?
Well, so that's basically you walk into this with eyes wide open. You're taking risk. You understand that rarely ever happens that your revenue projections are going to hold, especially if it's an innovative solution. So you need to calculate your risk when you're walking into this and knowing what your downside is and protect your downside. It's just the only recommendation I can make, right? Because those projections the more innovative solution is, the higher probability the projection is not going to hold. So you need to kind of think about what's your lowest, a lowest scenario, highest scenario, and mid of the road scenario. All right?
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you very
Great
much.
job.